Most men think compatibility means peace. It doesn't. Compatibility is not we never argue. Compatibility is not we like the same music. Compatibility is not the chemistry feels incredible. That's attraction, not compatibility. And many men do not understand the difference until they are emotionally invested deeply enough that leaving becomes painful. That's usually when reality finally arrives. Here is what compatibility actually is. Compatibility is when two people's values, emotional patterns, communication styles, life goals, and psychological needs can function together long-term without creating constant emotional friction. That's it. Not perfection. Not mind reading. Not endless harmony. Workable alignment. That is what sustains relationships after the excitement phase disappears. And this is where many men make one of the biggest mistakes of their lives. They confuse chemistry with compatibility. The attraction feels intense. The conversations feel addictive. The emotional highs feel meaningful. The physical connection feels powerful. So they assume this must be right. Not necessarily. Chemistry creates emotional acceleration. Compatibility creates structural stability. Those are different things. And many men spend years chasing emotional intensity while ignoring whether the relationship is actually sustainable. Then later, they describe the relationship the same way. Passionate, but exhausting. Exactly. Because chemistry can temporarily hide incompatibility. Reality eventually exposes it. Always, here is the first category of compatibility most men underestimate. Values, not hobbies. Not surface-level interests. Values. What matters to you fundamentally? Security or freedom? Stability or adventure? Growth or comfort? Family or independence? Saving or spending? Privacy or constant social connection? These things shape daily life far more than attraction does. For example, you believe money should create experiences, travel, memories, exploration, freedom. She believes money should create security, savings, predictability, stability, low risk. Neither person is wrong. But every financial decision becomes friction because the underlying values are different. And relationships become exhausting when every major life decision feels like negotiation instead of alignment. Another example, you are growth-oriented. You constantly want improvement, new goals, new challenges, new experiences. She values emotional predictability and stability. She dislikes constant change. She wants comfort and consistency. Again, neither person is bad. But eventually one person feels emotionally restricted while the other feels emotionally overwhelmed. This is why shared values matter more than shared hobbies. Shared hobbies create moments. Shared values create long-term stability. Now, here is another thing men misunderstand. Compatibility does not mean sameness. Some differences create balance, but core differences create friction. And many men ignore that because attraction clouds judgment early. That is why clarity matters more than excitement, especially after 40, because older men eventually realize peace matters more than emotional chaos. Now let's talk about life direction. This is another category people ignore until reality forces the issue. You want children. She doesn't. You want a quiet, family-centered life. She wants constant movement and career ambition. You want to settle permanently. She wants freedom and flexibility. Those are not small disagreements. Those are directional conflicts. And relationships struggle when two people are trying to build completely different futures together. Many men think love will solve this eventually. It won't. Love does not erase incompatible life goals. And the longer people delay confronting that reality, the more emotionally painful the relationship becomes later. Now here is another category most men completely underestimate. Communication compatibility. This is not about talking more. It is about whether your communication styles create understanding or repeated emotional confusion. For example, you communicate directly. You say exactly what you mean. You solve problems practically. She communicates emotionally and indirectly. Hints, tone shifts, subtle emotional cues, unspoken expectations. Now both people feel misunderstood constantly. You think she should just say what she means. She thinks he should already understand how I feel. Neither person feels emotionally understood, and over time, repeated misunderstanding creates resentment. Or this, you need space during conflict. Silence helps you regulate emotionally. She needs immediate discussion to feel emotionally secure. Now your withdrawal feels like abandonment to her. Her urgency feels emotionally overwhelming to you. Both people are unintentionally triggering each other constantly. This is why communication compatibility matters deeply. Not because compatible couples never argue, because their communication styles can function together without destroying emotional safety. Now, let's discuss conflict patterns. This is where many relationships quietly collapse. Most men focus on whether arguments happen. Wrong focus. Every long-term relationship has conflict. The real question is, what happens during conflict? Do both people regulate emotionally? Can accountability exist without humiliation? Can disagreements remain respectful? Can repair happen afterward? Some people attack during conflict. Some shut down. Some become defensive. Some withdraw emotionally for days. And if two incompatible conflict styles collide repeatedly, emotional exhaustion develops fast. For example, you need resolution before sleeping. You cannot relax while tension remains unresolved. She needs time to emotionally process before discussing anything. Now your urgency feels like pressure. Her delay feels like rejection. And eventually, every disagreement becomes emotionally draining before the actual issue even gets resolved. This is why compatibility matters. Not because compatible couples avoid struggle, because their struggles remain manageable instead of psychologically destructive. Now here is an uncomfortable truth. Many men eventually learn the hard way. You can deeply love someone who is fundamentally wrong for you, long term. That happens constantly. The chemistry feels rare. The emotional connection feels meaningful. The attraction feels undeniable. Meanwhile, the relationship itself feels unstable because love and compatibility are not identical. And many men spend years trying to force compatibility onto relationships built mostly on emotional intensity. Eventually, reality wins. It always does. Now here is the opposite truth. Nobody talks about enough. Some highly compatible relationships feel boring initially. Not toxic, not dramatic, not emotionally chaotic, just stable. And men who became psychologically conditioned to emotional volatility often mistake peace for lack of connection. That is dangerous because emotional chaos creates stimulation. Stability creates security. Those are different emotional experiences. Many men chase stimulation when what they actually need is compatibility. That realization usually comes later in life. Now let's talk about emotional compatibility. Because this matters more than most men realize, some people naturally require high emotional closeness, frequent communication, frequent reassurance, high emotional engagement. Others are more independent emotionally. They need more solitude, more internal processing, more personal space. Neither is wrong. But if those needs remain unaddressed, both people eventually feel emotionally deprived. One feels emotionally abandoned. The other feels emotionally overwhelmed. Again, this is not about blame. This is about alignment. Strong relationships usually happen when emotional needs are understood clearly instead of judged constantly. Now here is another important category. Lifestyle compatibility. This sounds boring when people are young. It becomes extremely important later. How do you handle stress? How do you spend money? How organized are you? How social are you? How important is routine to you? What kind of daily life do you actually want? Because relationships are not built in vacations and romantic weekends. They are built in ordinary Tuesdays. and ordinary life exposes incompatibility very quickly. Now let's discuss emotional maturity, because this changes everything. You can have two good people who are completely incapable of maintaining a healthy relationship because neither person regulates emotion well. One becomes reactive, the other becomes avoidant. One escalates, the other emotionally disappears. Now every disagreement damages connection instead of deepening understanding. This is why emotional maturity matters more than charm. Charm helps relationships begin. Emotional maturity helps them survive. Now here is the reality many men avoid. Some relationships fail because the people involved are genuinely incompatible. Not evil, not toxic, not abusive, just incompatible. And forcing incompatible relationships to continue usually creates emotional exhaustion for both people. This is why discernment matters early. Most men ask, "Do I feel strongly about her?" A better question is, can we realistically build a peaceful life together long term? That question changes everything, because long-term compatibility is less about emotional intensity and more about emotional sustainability. Can both people maintain connection without constantly draining each other psychologically? That is the real test. Now let's discuss what compatible couples actually look like. They still disagree. They still experience stress. They still annoy each other sometimes. They still have difficult seasons. But underneath the conflict, the structure remains stable. Shared values, shared direction, shared respect, shared willingness to repair. That foundation matters enormously, especially during difficult seasons, because attraction fluctuates. Stress affects intimacy. Children affect routines. Life affects emotional energy. But compatibility creates resilience. Now, here is another thing older men eventually understand. Peace is underrated. Not boredom, not emotional numbness. Peace, the ability to feel emotionally safe inside your own relationship. The ability to communicate honestly without fear of emotional chaos. The ability to disagree without feeling psychologically exhausted afterward. That matters more than temporary emotional highs, especially after enough life experience. Now let's talk about what men should actually evaluate early in relationships. Not just attraction, patterns. How does she handle disappointment? How does she communicate frustration? How does she respond to boundaries? How does she behave under stress? How does she treat people when emotionally upset? Can accountability exist in the relationship? Can conflict remain respectful? Those questions reveal long-term compatibility far more accurately than chemistry does. Because chemistry is immediate, compatibility reveals itself through repeated patterns over time. And this is why emotionally mature men move slower emotionally. Not because they fear commitment, because they understand commitment has consequences. Now here is the final truth. Compatibility is not about finding someone identical to you. It is about finding someone whose emotional patterns, values, direction, and communication style can realistically coexist with yours long-term without constant emotional damage. That is what matters. Because attraction alone cannot carry a relationship through decades. Feelings fluctuate. Stress fluctuates. Life changes constantly. But alignment creates stability. And stability is what allows connection to survive long after the excitement phase disappears. Most men only fully understand that after enough experience forces them to stop chasing intensity and start valuing peace. That is usually when relationships finally begin making sense.